jungle of London.
Yes, a very green jungle and cloudy. So hello.
Hello. My name is Nancy Stark-Smith, and I'm in London with Marlon in the backyard of the place we're staying after 4 weeks of being here doing intensive workshops and underscores and work groups and conversations. Yeah, the underscore is a structure or a framework, a score for practicing dance improvisation, particularly that includes contact improvisation but integrates it in a broader field of improvised practice. Mm-hmm. And it grew out of my teaching of contact improvisation after about 15 years of working with contact. And in contact improvisation, there's no set pedagogy of training, and so everyone continues to improvise how they work with people and proliferates a lot of teaching material. So after about 15 years, I started to feel very kind of claustrophobic and trapped by my own pedagogy of materials, and was sort of looking to open up the space in it again. And a period of a few years transpired where I was actually quite confused about what I was doing. I would come into class and just sort of open up the space and put in some images and sort of generate a state of movement and shift it around, and then occasionally think, oh, we could really use to focus very specifically on something physical, like a physical technique, and I would sort of grab randomly from the pedagogy, you could say, or the accumulated materials and pick something, but then I really was confused about what I was doing. Anyway, it's a longer story, but in one summer I started to notice that students were asking me questions that sounded like, well, you know that part of class where we get very still and we get very subtle and we get very deep, and I thought, yeah, I know the state you're talking about, but what do you mean that part of class? And then somebody would say, you know that part of class where we get really wild and disoriented and falling and crashing and, momentum, and then again, I thought, yeah, I know the state or the feeling you're talking about, but what do you mean that part of class? As if there was a kind of logic to what I was experiencing as very random at that time. And at that summer, I started to realize that there was a kind of underscore. There was a logic, there were reference points to what I was experiencing as very random that I always would touch on. So I became suddenly very interested in what are those underpinnings. This didn't have a name for the first 10 years of working with it. And one of the things that's very interesting to me about it is the difference between something being prescriptive, of telling you what to do in the future, and descriptive as a way of helping you talk about what you've just experienced. And so I feel like the underscore is a little bit of both. Initially it was descriptive. It was noticing what I'd already been doing for years, but extracting from that certain principles and then kind of giving them shorthand names, and then enjoying just for fun making these little symbols, these little glyphs that sort of captured what felt like the nature of that state without words. And so this list of things started to accumulate. It had a kind of logic of a sequence, but I wasn't that happy with the idea of it having to be always this and this and this for how much time. But it's really a research tool. I think of it as a way of studying phenomena and in dance improvisation, and changes of state and changes of my physical state and mental state and individuals' relationship to gravity and the environment, and then to movement, and then to each other, and including contact improvisation, and then moving into a more open form. And then it has a resolution and a time to reflect on what the experience has been and harvest from that any observations, and then sharing of observations. But it continues to be a great research tool for me and for others, I think, but it's also become then this almost prescriptive form that people like to do because it's a container for the improvisation. It helps focus it even though it's quite open. And I think it helps people feel that they will be able to go through these different states not interrupted, you could say, and to feel as a group what that generates, instead of a kind of random jam situation where people are going and they're talking and some are but it has a coherence to it as a group entity, even though one has one's individual experience. So you're kind of moving from self and forces to movement, environment, others, light, sound, other kinds of connections and relationships to one another. Materials, and I love to be with people in that frame of mind where we're really very attentive to what's happening right now and the context of that, and everything about the context of that, the weather and what happened yesterday and who's missing today. All of that has an effect.
Yeah.
I mean, we're very, I guess, resilient creatures, and we can be very strong, but we're also very sensitive. And to some degree, I feel like the underscore protects that, but it also challenges that. And I like those two things about it, that yes, there's a protection in that you can go deeply into these states, but you're going to be asked to encounter things that you don't necessarily expect, and hopefully meet them somehow. I mean, it challenges us to be ready to meet things that we didn't think we wanted, or like that, and improvise with it and create something from that. You could say experiential or different levels of the brain, perhaps, although I don't know about brain science that much, and then being able to articulate, and then sometimes going into very sort of primitive states of just like releasing tone and releasing society almost, and going into a deeper sense of gravity and support of the earth and all of that, and then coming back out into, but also the studying and the experiencing it, I like very much. Study and practice together, I feel like that really builds a kind of dimensional knowledge that I'm interested in. But the other factor is curiosity, I think, and just sort of being interested in finding things that I don't understand yet, but also physicalizing it rather than just think, to bring that aspect in, but then drop it back into the body again, let the body process it and have experience, and some of this, I'm just thinking of Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, whose work, I've never formally trained in it, but I've interviewed her many times for the magazine, and I have taken class with her, and I just have great respect for it.
You have taught together also?
Taught together?
Yeah,
probably, and done we've done a lot of things together, and we're friends. I love her. But also the idea in terms of experiential anatomy that you can learn about the mind of the body, not the brain necessarily or only thinking, the intelligence, the knowledge of the body through experiencing it. So the idea that you could take this image of a skeleton on the wall or muscle system or organs and put your attention, as you mentioned, into your body, into your sensation, and have experience, and there's something empirical in terms of the research that your experience is telling you something about that. So you're not just telling yourself to have an experience, but your experience is revealing knowledge. But then how do you apprehend that or something? You have the experience, do you articulate it, do you write about it, do you draw? Do you transmit it? How do you transmit it to anybody, or why would you want to, or something? Terms that I've been using is body time. And, when we arrive into practice, there's a sense of arriving into body time, which I could say is that you have enough time to register your sensations and absorb their information, their inspiration, their nutritional value, I sometimes say. And so, I mean, we're so busy. Everybody is so busy now and is shifting attention over and over and over that, to just feel you actually have those extra seconds, it may be minutes, it may be hours, but this sense of space, then you could do it quickly in an easier way, in a more, open and ready way, less stressful way, but more efficient way, perhaps, later when you need to, because you had the time to actually orient to your sensations as primary information. rather than I'm doing my push-ups and,
yeah.
you know, only
Or
feeling
walking
it when there's
around, yeah.
pain or something like that. But you feel the textures of the sensations, and where they are in the body. You get to know the signals of the body, and that's what I think keeps the work safe as well, by and large. I mean, considering how wild and unpredictable it can get, that there are as few injuries as there are, I think is because we're working that way. So that you feel when you're coming up against a limit, even if it's fast, and you will redirect things away from injury. It happens over and over. So, yeah, I think there is a spaciousness to it, although we have tried to do the underscore in a half an hour once, which was really a wonderfully failed experiment. But what was interesting is that the first time we tried it, it was horrible. It felt horrible, and it just seemed so stupid. But then we thought, well, wait, let's try again, and just tweak the proportions of the timing. And it started to feel okay, and it was really interesting to feel like one could plant that seed. I'm also interested in that aspect very much, is what is the effect of suggesting something without directing it, without saying, we will do this, but maybe something to consider this time is this. It's like you throw a seed out into a field, and it has an effect, and I'm very interested in the phenomena of how that works. I mean, it might just even be somebody in the circle at the first meeting says, you know, I'm glad to be here, but, you know, like my beloved grandmother died yesterday, and I'm mourning that. And somehow, I don't know where that goes, that information. It goes into the minds and bodies of the people who are improvising, about to improvise, and who knows how it comes out and how it gets resolved or worked through. So I'm kind of curious about that. You could, if you go too far, again, it gets way too complex. So the idiot button, or the idea of a kind of breathing between simple and complex, and simple, which might also be low brain, high brain, low brain, I don't know, but this breathing seems really important to survive the experience. To learn too, if somebody is pointing you in a direction, you go in that direction, you look for the thing that they're pointing you to, you find it, and then you feel it and you experience it, and maybe it opens a new place for you that you actually hadn't experienced before. So I think that that's what a lot of learning is, and that's positive. But again, with something like this, if the point is to research as well as to have satisfying, embodied, intelligent, playful experience all at the same time, in one moment it's incredibly delightful, and the next moment it's very serious and confusing, and then revealing, and then I don't know. I love that there's many layers to it at this concurrently, and that in that way we serve one another, because I don't know what your experience is, and I can't control it, and I don't want to. There's that Kars quote from the Finite and Infinite Games where he says something about, because I can't predict your future, I can't predict mine, and so we are preparing each other for surprise, something like that. And I think that that's true in any improvisation, and I think that that's what we love about it, that it's not completely prescribed, and to whatever degree it's contained and pointed, there's still a lot of space to discover it. You're creating a solidity and a reference that gets stronger and stronger over time. And so how is that permeable so that your experience might diverge from that, and you could study something else? There may be another level of it that you hadn't perceived before, and if it becomes too solid, then you're just in a little box. You were going to say paradox, but it is a paradox and a paradigm at the same time. Because it doesn't really tell you what to do. Like, for instance, you know, arriving energetically and physically, and meeting and circulation and skinosphere, which is it's a made-up word, a kind of release of the... What it refers to was a joke at first, as most things end up getting made. Either a joke or a crisis, you know what I mean? Like where you have to invent something because something goes wrong, you know? But kinosphere, you know, which would be the next thing, is sort of a...
Kinosphere,
right, so kinosphere is the movement arena that you can reach with your limbs without moving your center, right? So, but in contact improvisation, this is the other feature of London. like
Ongoing.
these trajectories of planes coming and going.
Yes.
But in contact improvisation, I really feel like it's not just my body moving through space, but things moving through my body. So I feel changes of, you could say, state or textures. There's compressions and expansions and flows and flies and all kinds of different things that I experience inside my body itself, moving through. And so how do you prepare for that? How do you turn that on? So you could say that skinosphere, if this is sort of the body, this is sort of collecting one's presence in the present moment, this is arriving into sensation in the body. This is just a gathering of players of who's there and checking in about a number of things.
Co-presence.
This is the studio space, and this is just any random path through it, but it's people moving through the space, arriving into the room, seeing each other, opening connections that way, and then going more internal into a sensation of gravity and support, and then this is more sort of mobilizing, shaking, loosening the body mass itself, which then goes into, stretching and starting to extend into the environment and increasing physical tone and all the low, like falls and rolls and ways of locomoting close to the ground, and then the higher levels where the center is up off the ground and traveling. Kinesphere. This is just like sort of normal warm-up behavior. It's not really inventing
Kind of
anything. It's
from some kind of center to some expansive
right.
relational
Exactly.
presence.
Yeah. And again, sometimes you skip things or you don't feel like you need it, or it's sort of mediating between the ideas of the things and your present experience and your sensation and your instincts that say, no, today I want to just go directly to this. I don't want to go to that other thing. So this would be traveling through the space or expanding one's sense of awareness to include more, take in more, send more. Speaking of sending.
We have some rain. Yes,
Well,
summer
let's
in
see.
London.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably we will have to go inside, do you think? Or, I don't know. Let's see, probably will pass us.
We could get a little further under this jungle bush and see if that works. But anyway, so this is just moving past people, and it's just that sense that it's different than being alone in a room. So again, it's just like how to start to touch on and share between us a language for talking about what we experience with these things. So it's just a stimulation to have people walk by, drop next to you, approach you, go away, and it starts to get you ready to be touched also, which is, then you get into all these potential connections, which is certainly not exhaustive, but which started when I first, when the underscore first started to come out. It was just what I had already been doing in contact classes of having people circulate and have little glancing touches to start to get your skin used to being touched from different directions without even expecting it. So that instead of free traction to start to move towards someone or put your hands on them, you can study that and you can see, well, maybe I feel attracted, but this time I'm not going to go, or I feel to go away, but I'm going to try going with, or coincidences of color, of movement, of sound and movement, of different relationships to start to... It's building your noticing ability. So if you notice, for instance, that as soon as the music comes on, it influences you, maybe you can inhibit it just to play with that instead of just to make things more conscious. There's plenty of stuff that's sort of unconscious, that's working at the same time, but as we get a little bit more aware of things, we can play with them more actively. So this is all called grazing, like a series of short connections. So it's warming you up to connection, and then at some point you go into engagement, and again, I say all along, it's sort of play research, and it's just a way of sort of studying, phenomena and testing it and challenging it also. And this is one of the hardest things as it gets more popular is to convey that spirit of research in it, rather than, you didn't preamble today, you did it wrong. It's like, well, that's not exactly the right idea behind it. But engagement would be...
I think that is the danger in practically anything that we do in relationship with exploration of experience. But
Yeah, and I just, in my book Caught Falling, and there's a chapter at the back about the underscore. I can pull it out if you want for this, but it took me a long time to be willing to write about it, because I feel like it's an oral tradition a little bit, and it usually comes up in workshops, and after we've already established some of the physical references for what might be contained in any of these phases. So I'm experimenting with how to share it with people, but finally I thought, well, maybe it's time to just commit to some language around it, because other people were also starting to write about it. But the grazing is more like you're moving around and you're testing and tasting things and receiving and giving and getting warmed up to connection. This is more where you just arrive into it and you develop something, you stay with it. And this might be where the longer contact improvisation warm-up can happen. And then we get to study endings. You could say that this is sort of the membrane around the connection, around the engagement has popped, and you just have this, and then it's the X separates, and then it forms sort of two individuals again. And then we get to study what is the transition between one form or one engagement and another, or in the continuity of your experience. This is often after a longer dance where people might go get a drink of water or something.
What are those beginnings or endings?
But to not do that in here, and to sort of stream through it and see where's your attention going, how do you feel, and then you can go at this point into, this is the open score, into any of these things in any order. So after that engagement, you may feel like circulating around the space, or going internal again, or grazing again, or you can also step out to observe. But once you're in the underscore, the idea is that everybody's in all the time until we finish it, so that whatever you're doing or however you're doing it is part of the overall composition of what's going on. So we get to study and really see each other instead of, oh, he's out or he's in, or and then at some point we make a final resolution. It can be done in a number of ways. Individually disengage from that whole, and then go into reflection and harvest, which is sort of a time to rest, warm down, but also like immediately like waking up from a dream almost, to review your experience of the past. This is usually about 3 hours. And see if there's certain things to harvest, certain observations that were very clear, like you had a very delightful coincidence, or you had a rough time in a transition from one state to another. You got kind of stuck and you wondered about that. And
is this meta reflection going on perhaps all the time? This
right, but it's so easy to forget them, because as one thing leads to the next, by the time you're finished, like to remember a coincidence or transition you had like 2 hours ago. I mean, sometimes I'll grab my notebook and just like write something down in the middle of it. There's nothing against that, you know, if I really want to remember. But these, so then we have some sharing, depends on how big the group is. And I find that that kind of reflection or sharing of, it's not interpretation particularly, it's more like, when that happened, I saw this, or I noticed this, or then I felt my state change to that, or there's not so much interpretation or introduction or. And so to hear other people's experience like that opens pathways in my own mind about what's possible. And I think that that has a kind of composting effect on the experience as people really hear what happened for each other. It's not necessarily I like this or I didn't like this. We sometimes try to get away from that, although I do encourage people to talk about the challenges that they had, because sometimes they feel a kind of group pressure to sort of talk about their ecstatic experience or how wonderful it was for them. But I really encourage people to look a little more closely at what they actually experienced and try to bring language to it. I think that that articulation is part of the process. It's kind of an underscore aspect of it, or over. I mean, I actually like that it's the underscore, not the overscore. I would hate it if it was the over. The name came just from describing how it came to a group of people, and then hearing myself say, you know, underneath what I felt was random was this sort of underscore functioning all the time, and I wanted to know what that was. I thought, ooh, underscore, maybe that's the name. So these extra things are things that are like, call them non-sequential, anytime, all the time aspects, meaning that they are possible to tune into any time.
Yeah.
And that includes this kind of continuity, this streaming of a sense of continuity in your perception, in your life force, whether you like what you're doing, don't like what you're doing, know what you're doing, don't know what you're doing, that underneath all of that is a kind of continuity.
Yeah.
Gaps are what we could say temporary absence of reference, which could be very pleasant, could be challenging, like panic, like where am I, what am I supposed to do now, like what's going on. But I really am very interested in that, what's in those spaces, and maybe those are also opportunities to discover something new if you can sustain that feeling of kind of not quite knowing what's going on. I think it's healthy and interesting, and so there's a lot of material in there. Because often what people do unconsciously when there is a moment like that is that they put in something that is familiar, and that takes out the gap. But one of my images for this is like going out at night and seeing the stars, and at twilight there might be just a few stars, and you try to see what the constellation is, but you can't make it out yet. And you're like straining, and you think, God, is that Cassiopeia, or what? You can't see it, and you just have to wait a little longer till there's a little more. It's a little darker, and there's more points of light, and you think, then you can see it. So sometimes a new pattern is coming up, or a new arrangement, or a new kind of relationship that you don't have a name for, or you haven't experienced before. So sometimes it's interesting to kind of hang out with that a little bit to see what comes. And this is just a zoom lens to be able to sort of zoom into very tiny sensations maybe in the body, or zoom out to context or bigger context, and keep moving between different levels of view. And this is just a reminder to open ears, because we're listening physically very well. This is a new one that isn't quite in the lexicon yet, but I'm trying it out. It is a kind of listening and seeing, and being able to notice that you can observe anytime. You don't have to step to the side and observe the phenomena. You're observing it while you're doing it to varying degrees. And then there's the idiot button.
That's great.
Which came up a few years ago because I just was feeling like we're learning to become so incredibly sensitive to so many things, that you could get paralyzed with awareness, that you don't even know what to do anymore. You can't feel your instincts. You can't, feel your imagination or that. So this is an invitation to just simplify, basically.
Yeah.
And it's amusing, so it makes it light. But I think when people get too overwhelmed, they shut down for protection. And I guess there's lots of options. And that's the thing that I love about it, is that with that spirit and people's participation, and they come back with really interesting perceptions and articulations of what they actually experienced. And then it was like, well, maybe we should make a new connection and make a new glyph for it or something like that. My only hesitation is to make it any bigger or more, because as it is, I usually just go through this with a group. It takes about an hour and a half usually to really get into it, with a group that's going to practice it the next day, so that they can sleep on it, forget about it. I tell people, don't worry about it. Let these ideas just drop back into the back of the mind instead of the front, and let's just now follow our physical, our somatic intelligence with a little reference. It's like the banks of a river or something, where you have these ideas somewhere, you forget them, you follow your body and the group and your instincts, and then occasionally, either descriptively or prescriptively, you remember them again. So you're kind of dancing in between the two, the prescription and the description, or with neither. I think the fact that people have profound experience is not a bad thing. And that they feel satisfied on different levels of integration, or they get curious, or they reveal things. I mean, all that's fine, but I just would hope that it not get pinned down or assumed that it has to be experienced in a certain way. It's a working tool. From Claire Filmont, who's a French dancer, improviser, who was in a number of workshops with me, very bright, very creative. And sometimes in class, I would have us do the small dance of standing, which is a form that Steve Paxton worked with and came up with many years ago, and is often used as preparation for contact improvisation. So I would do that in my classes, and sometimes I would enjoy, again for play and for interest, to stand facing a particular direction, like sometimes where you were born or where you're going next after a workshop, and to imagine the arcs zooming out of that room in those directions. And so Claire had an interest in having a simultaneous dance practice in different parts of the globe, and she asked if she could use the underscore and have a simultaneous practice of the underscore, and have the people facing the next place to the east in the ring around the globe, at the beginning of the underscore and at the end of the underscore, to turn around, stand up, and face to the west, and then connect in that way. So I said, sure. And, I was involved with her in creating the different aspects of the global underscore, which basically follows pretty much a normal underscore. She did it for 10 years, and as I continued to teach and work with the underscore, and other people would ask me, can I do the underscore, facilitate an underscore in Uruguay or in wherever I live, and I said, sure, give it a try. And mostly people who had done workshops and had worked with it a little bit more than once. And so it started to grow. And this year, the last 2 years, Claire hasn't been coordinating it. The folks in New York who do the underscore have stepped forward to do it. I told Claire, you don't owe me anything. We could just stop doing a global after 10 years when she was sort of completed a cycle.
Yeah.
But it turned out that a lot of people really enjoyed doing it, and I happened to be somewhere doing an underscore around it's usually around the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. So we did one here as part of the Somatic and Technology Conference,
that's
because
what we
so Andrea
We have
Davidson,
arrived.
we have arrived, so almost the present or the recent past, and she invited me to the Somatics and Technology Conference, and I met her in Istanbul a couple years ago, and I said, why? I'm not really a somatics person, and I'm not at all a technology person, so why would you want me to come to this conference? And she talked about a few things, and I started to think about it a little bit, and I thought, well, gee, maybe the underscore is a somatic technology, in a way. You could just think of it that way. You could think that it organizes experience. It's a tool to direct somatic experience and study and research. So I thought, well, maybe we could just do the underscore in the middle of this conference. And usually it's not observed. I'm experimenting with that now, with public viewing of the underscore. But mostly it's been participatory. So I thought, that would be challenging. But maybe if these people who are interested in somatics and technology could be allowed to come in or come out of this 3-hour, 4-hour event, and get a little bit of a preparatory talk, which I wasn't sure that the people I was talking to in the morning would be the same people who were coming in the afternoon. So it was quite out of my control, but I thought that's kind of interesting too. There were a lot of balls in the air for this global, because there were like 70 places this year. And that's the way biggest that it's ever been. And in fact, I love this drawing. One of Brandon Stephenson from the New York coordinators drew this map of, because this year they decided to link the sites not east to west, but around the globe north to south.
Oh, wow.
So these little zigzags represent like a place on the globe that was doing the global underscore. And so it went down, went under, and then it came up the other side, and then it went over again. It took me a while to figure out what the heck this was, who I was facing, and why, and I still don't know that I really got it, but I love this drawing. And we
added then a little bit of this aspects of broadcasting,
Right.
or that in a way it's for me it's kind of an augmentation of some kind of awareness that
Well,
that
it's
perhaps
really
it came in.
complicated enough, like when you're doing an underscore just in one space and you're navigating through
Yeah.
these levels of experience and yourself and the group, and it's complex already.
Yeah.
Then you have a global underscore where there are 30 or 40 places around the world, and when you're standing doing your small dance meditation, you're facing Buenos Aires and imagining a group there in a red studio because they told you, and there's 30 people, and they're facing, I don't know, Patagonia or something, who's facing Australia, who's facing Japan
Zealand,
or whatever,
yeah.
New Zealand, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's extra complex, and usually once the underscore gets going after that first standing, people tend to sort of forget and maybe occasionally remember about the others.
Yeah.
Maybe they know somebody in Grenoble, France or something who's doing the underscore at the same time, and so it's kind of fun to skip around and visit, you know, mentally, but it's only been mentally.
Mental, yeah.
Right, and so
This is a
now-
telepathic work.
so part of the challenge this year with the conference was, okay, in honor of this Somatics and Technology conference, let's see if we could bring a little bit more technology into this and see what it feels like. So, you know, you and I talked and brainstormed wildly
Yeah.
for an hour, and I'm just trying to think, how do we keep it simple? How do
Yeah,
we
yeah.
expand to include the ideas and then distill them down
Yeah.
to something that's reasonable, and that our whole environment there is not being taken over by projections
Yeah,
of
yeah.
people in other places. And so all of that tweaking, I thought, was very interesting compositionally, because we
Yeah.
were composing experience, even though you can't control it.
Yeah.
So when we talked about how big is the projection area going to be on the wall,
Yeah.
like, is it like a little window?
Yeah.
And then through your site, people joining, how savvy are they about that? How daunting is that?
Yeah.
You know, out of 70, I think there were 8 that had video streaming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then we could see them, so that we could actually see them at the same time, not
Yeah.
think about them.
And we realize how out of sync some
Exactly.
of them are.
I said, wait a minute, they should be standing now, or like, why are they, so that was quite funny, and it's raining.
Yeah, it's raining. It's like
It'll
this-
probably stop in a
Yeah.
second, let's just see.
Just, yeah, but
Let me move this just so.
yeah, let me
yeah.
careful with the books. This London is really,
Yeah,
it's about
just-
change.
I mean, it's about change, right. So, and then on top of that, Isabel Valverde was coming, Portuguese choreographer who Andrea told me about, who choreographs on Second Life, which I'd heard of it, but I really didn't know what it was. So, you told me
Yeah.
at first what it was, and I was trying to imagine that, and these avatars,
avatars, yeah.
and but
Digital
they're
bodies.
flying, and do they have gravity? No. Do they touch? Can you move through somebody? Or
Yeah.
I mean, it was really fun thinking
Yeah.
about it. But then, as with everything, like, you know, the other level of connection between a kind of visioning of things and a creative, like, oh, we could do this and this, and then trying to bring it down to a reality and integrate it and make sure the cables are right and how big is the thing. But anyway, yeah, so she, interestingly, Isabel knows, she does contact improvisation, and she's done jams, and she did a global underscore once.
Yeah.
So she has this site, which I love coincidences. They're some of my favorite things. Like this, I don't want to get it.
Yeah, with the,
But when she was describing Koru Island, and she said it's like a
That
sphere.
is a place in Second Life,
It's
yeah.
a place in Second Life, like a sphere that is separated, the inside of which is projected. They do images of Portugal on one side and New Zealand on the other, because that's her co-researcher, this red
Yeah.
floor. And I tried to draw it as she was talking about it, and I thought, oh my God, it looks like one of the glyphs of the underscore.
yeah.
Anyway, she was planning to project, and did, some of those live video streams on the inside
yeah.
of these spheres
Yeah.
on Second Life. And I actually did end up over by that projection at one point very late in the underscore, and I was just sort of, it was like I was looking at it, but I wasn't seeing it really, but I was seeing these people moving, and I was attracted to get closer to it. And then suddenly I recognized somebody, and I realized that these were the people where I live in Massachusetts, who I normally do the underscore with, who were doing this global underscore. I mean, projected on Second Life in the room in Chichester, and so, you know, I like the idea of extending presence.
Yeah,
you know,
that's kind of the main question, or this works as a springboard to think or analyze, perhaps.
Right, and what we do with that, and how we extend our own presence. We talk about expanded kinesphere and expanded awareness. What do we do with what we gather from that perception, and what do we give to it, and can they receive from us, and what kind of a dialogue is there? So, I formatted book.
That's great. It's just to remind you that you are actually with a book.
and
Oh, nice.
there's dancing and people, and there's me and Steve a long time ago. And anyway, at the very back of this, there is a description of this is Steve. This is the cover image, but we realized that it might be a little too provocative for a cover, so we ended up with this.
Oh, she's just flying.
But, just to counterbalance contact improvisation. But anyway, there's the chapter on the underscore that talks about the background of it and goes through some of the glyphs, and I mean all of them actually, with short descriptions.
Okay.
And this is available through Contact Quarterly, the magazine that I make with Lisa Nelson. This was another global underscore when there were only like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 main
From 9
places.
to 70.
I know, and these were the satellites and stuff. Yeah. So, what does it mean to be together? What is co-presence? What is interbeing? What is you know? And what do you do with that? Yes, you can train in that. You can train to notice more things, and that gets very fun in a group of people. Where, let's say, a horn honks that ends up being sort of punctuation for the end of a resolution, and 20 out of 25 people heard it. And you don't even almost have to say anything, like the smiles come on the face, and we've studied punctuation, we've studied listening, we've studied resolution, and so the awareness is there, and it really gets fun in that sense. But again, it could get to be a lot of things to notice. And what do you do with that? If you're aware of, if people are poking you in that sense of Facebook or whatever, and, you know, I mean, isn't that overwhelming I mean, I don't necessarily want to be poked like 100 times a day. I mean, life is complex enough as it is, and that's one of the reasons I also feel like the underscore has been attractive to people, because it gives you sanctuary from that. Like, especially, okay, you're preambulating, you're seeing people, you're arriving, you're getting there, you're getting synchronized, and then for me, sometimes I just drop it. I really drop out. And I drop into the feeling of gravity and the earth and my presence on the earth as a body. And I arrive, again, into the intelligence of my own soma, whatever it is, my cells, my sensation, my intelligence in the body, and everything that's going into that moment, whether it's knowledge of the underscore, love of dancing, research, the weather, and something will get made, and it's mysterious. And I like to try to keep space for the mystery, for sure, because I just find it delightful. But it has to be a balance, I think, of the known and the unknown, so that you're not completely flailing. Simplifying is interesting because I think it works both ways, whether there's a lot coming in, and sometimes I imagine it almost like a cloud cover also, that it gets a little bit denser so that the exposure is not so intense, both to all of the things you're noticing, but also exposure of yourself out into the world, and that you might need it to soften a little bit or just mute a little bit, so it's not so intense all the time. And if you need it more intense, then go for the sunny day.
Or the water.
Or whatever
rain,
it is
yeah.
that makes it, tunes up, the intensity of things, and your noticing of things, the complexity and coincidences, and if it's too much, like how to turn it down a little bit. I think that's useful, but more and more I'm noticing that in the skinosphere, people need rest. They're so exhausted. They're so busy. They're so bombarded.
By life, you mean? In itself,
Yeah. That just even 10 minutes of just like, it's like nap time or something.
Yeah.
but it's a very deep replenishing. I'm sort of interested in that aspect of skinosphere. I have mixed feelings about that too, as I probably have about most of it, especially when I feel people really gravitating really strongly to one aspect of the underscore. I think, well, what's on the other side of it? Like, what do we need from this, and what's the counterbalance to it, so that it doesn't get too grooved in a certain way, the patterns of how we use this research tool.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that we have witnessed in the conversation and in the in the nature and the sun and clouds and rain, all the aspects of perhaps many aspects of this existing, and connecting with what is around us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.